Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show in what has been a momentous week for UK politics. With the Prime Minister's Brexit proposition bombing in the Commons and her own job under assault from the Tory backbenches, Theresa May's one last hope has been to appeal to the rest of Europe to cut her more slack on her Brexit deal. And so, in this week's show, Alex tests the attitude of other Europeans towards Brexit. He visits Denmark, a country which joined the European community on the same day as the UK, and which has shared many of the same Eurosceptic tendencies. He interviews top Social Democratic politician and former Defence Minister Nick Hagerup to test how the Danish political winds are blowing with regard to Britain's Brexit. And Alex also speaks to Magni Argy, who represents the Faroe Islands in the Danish Parliament and combines European scepticism with a wish for independence for his own islands. But first, to your tweets, messages and emails, and another great response to our show on Brexit last week. First of all, from Sandy. Sandy says, if the breakup happens, it will be Theresa's incompetence that will make it happen. Lynn says, best show yet on Brexit. Keep up the good work. Sarah Alba. Thank you, Lynn. And Sovereign Will's wish is for a government of national unity. I think chance will be a fine thing, with Caroline Lucas as PM. Z Beving says, thank you, Alex Salmond, for keeping us informed. Your input is absolutely vital for folk like me to be able to recognise what is going on and what it might mean for us. And finally, Stacey Reid, who has a view on what George Kerrivan said on the show last week, and she says, aren't the SNP alienating the people of Scotland with their pro-European stance? Regardless if it was a no vote in the UK referendum on Brexit, if we were part of the EU without the UK, then we still wouldn't be independent at all. At the dawn of Britain's Brexit debates, some of the more enthusiastic Brexiteers argued that many other countries were swithering on their own membership of the European Union. William Hills even released odds on which countries might accompany Britain at the exit door. It was thought that many might follow where Britain tried to boldly lead. One of the favourites was Denmark, a proudly independent country which famously rejected the Maastricht Treaty and refused to join the euro. However, in wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen, Alex found little or no enthusiasm for a Dexit. It seems that how others see us does not quite match Brexiteer expectations.
Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show from Christiansborg, where the Danish Parliament has been based for 100 years. Familiar, of course, to many of the avid viewers of Borgen. It's here that the Danish Parliament discusses all aspects of the Danish realm. But one of the things top of the agenda at the present moment is Brexit, the implications for the UK and the implications for Denmark. How would some poor the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us? That's what Robbie Burdens had to say, and today we're going to find out what Denmark has to say about Brexit. Nick Hagerup, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show. Now, your family have been a fixture of social democratic politics in Denmark for many generations. How do you assess the situation with the elections soon upcoming?
Actually, I think we are going to win the election and get back into government. The opinion polls are quite narrow, but they are leaning our way. So we're quite optimistic, but don't tell nobody.
Well, there are quite glacial changes in Danish politics. The opinion polls don't fluctuate wildly, but the Social Democrats seem to be moving ahead and the People's Party seem to be moving backwards. But isn't that because the Social Democrats have adopted some of the People's Party's programme and maybe the rhetoric on, for example, the thorny subject of immigration?
I think I would rather put it that it has been a concern to very many ordinary Danes, the situation about migration and refugees and so on. And I think that it has taken quite some time before we realized that we will have to take that concern very serious. But when we did, and after we did, then we have gained in the opinion polls.
And the Social Democrats, there's some talk that instead of the normal coalition, which has been a feature of Danish politics, the Social Democrats may say, well, we'll be a minority government. That would be quite novel in terms of the political system here.
The government before this government was a minority government with just one party, but it's not the common situation. But it's very rare that we have a majority government. So being a coalition of parties in the government is what is the normal picture.
Well, I ran a minority government myself once in Scotland for a few years. It has its good points. It also makes votes pretty exciting from day to day. So are you ready for cliff edge votes every session of Parliament?
Yeah, we're looking forward to do that.
I want to ask you, Nick, about Danish attitudes to the European Union. You joined, Denmark joined on the same day, the European Community as it was then, in 1973 as the UK. Has shared many of the sceptical attitudes towards aspects of Europe. I mean, for example, Denmark famously voted against the Maastricht Treaty, is not a member of the Euro. And yet the UK is moving out of Europe altogether, and I would be right in thinking there's not much sign that Denmark is going to follow suit. How do you explain that perhaps contradictory attitude of being sceptical about Europe for many Danes, but not wanting to go through the exit door?
I think all of us in Denmark are very, very sorry and sad that the UK is leaving the EU, because we had in so many areas a very strong ally in UK. But I think that, to put it shortly, we entered the EU with the UK, and we're going to stay in the EU with the German. The German are our main trade partner. Taking care of our Danish interest, we need, as a very small country, to be part of a greater community, and EU is one of those communities that suit us.
In a word, what would be the chances, in your estimation, of Denmark following the UK out of the exit door?
Next to zero. Actually, since UK decided to go Brexit, the opinion polls have shown a steady increase in the percentages of Danes that are supporting our membership of the EU. And I think part of it is that we are looking at a world around us where we see a lot of trouble and insecurity. Trump in the US, leaving EU, Putin in Russia, so on and so forth. And the EU is in that regard an anchor of comfort for us.
So the European Union would be regarded as a safe anchorage in a troubled world?
Yeah, one of those anchors that we really do need. Another one is NATO, of course, but we feel confident within the EU, and even though there is a lot of problem and a lot of things that if we could do it just our way, we would have done it another way, then generally we benefit a lot for being a member of the EU, and we have an influence that we, as a very small country, would not else have.
Now, Denmark's been famous politically for a social democratic consensus, even when the Social Democrats haven't been in power, meaning high taxation, high personal taxation, but a high standard of public services. How do you feel that? Is that consensus still robust, or is there pressure politically to move to a different economic and social model?
That model is still very robust, and actually the current government that we have at the moment, which is a right-wing government, they are very much trying to dig in on our agenda at the moment. So I think we will have a situation, no matter who wins the election, that there will be a very strong support to our welfare system and the quite high taxation.
A number of countries in Europe, including Denmark, have seen the rise of what could be called right-wing populist parties. Indeed, the Danish People's Party is one manifestation of that, not identical to other manifestations, but nonetheless. Is there an aspect whereby smaller countries have political systems which find it easier to respond to that than sometimes larger countries, where the established parties have found it very difficult to respond to a populist challenge?
No, actually, I think the problem is that the Social Democrats throughout Europe was very slow to recognize ordinary people's concern about the financial crisis, about the rise in unemployment, about youngsters not having the sufficient education, but also about migration and the refugee question. And if we're not able to address those concerns of people, then I can easily understand why they try to find other parties that takes their concern more seriously.
But in some countries, for example, France or Italy, even well-established socialist or social democratic parties have been swept aside.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Not necessarily just by right-wing populist parties, but by new movements, in the case of Macron in France. But in Denmark, the Social Democrats are making a comeback, are gaining, are leading in the polls. What do you put that down to? I mean, why have the Social Democrats in Denmark survived to move forward again in a way that other sister parties have found very difficult?
I think that these last 4 years in opposition, we have been able to address some of the agendas that ordinary people in Denmark are very concerned about. For instance, climate change, for instance, migration, for instance, our health system, and so on.
And what about Danish attitudes towards Scotland? I mean, Denmark was conquered England once, Canute the Great, but you never conquered Scotland.
No.
What's the Danish attitude towards Scotland?
We love Scotland. We love Scotland, and I think of Scotland as being something in between core UK and Nordic-like, and we feel very confident when we are together with Scots, because on a lot of issues and culture, you look somehow like us. I'm sorry.
We'll take that as a compliment. In the this post-Brexit era, where Scotland, of course, famously voted strongly in favour of being a part of the European community and was outvoted by England in particular. If Scotland were to look for a European autonomous place, would they get a friendly reception in countries like Denmark if they wanted to be part of the European context?
That's a very delicate question, because we have a strong position. We will not interfere into matters of other countries. But if you don't tell nobody, I can say that we would very much appreciate having Scotland, of course, preferably the whole UK as part of EU and a strong cooperation on the way down, but at least Scotland.
Of course, looking at one particular aspect of the issues thrown up by Brexit, fishing and fishing waters. And Denmark is a great fishing nation itself. Is this an area where Danish MPs have a particular concern?
Yes, it is. We are very concerned that we will be expelled from the British waters, since we have a lot of jobs depending on our fishing fleet being able to fish in British waters. And if we have a solution where we cannot fish in British waters, and where the price of that for Britain being that the UK cannot sell their fish in the European market, then we have a lose-lose situation. We cannot fish the fish and we cannot eat the fish.
So there's many issues that Brexit has thrown up which have still to be worked our way through. Do you think there's any chance, looking from the outside and not giving advice to the British people, do you think there's any chance that in the immediate future or in the medium term that Brexit will be reversed?
I hope so. But for all what we hear, then that is a very faint hope.
And from a Danish perspective, thinking about Denmark through the ages, I mean, a country which has had two empires. Firstly, when you conquered England in the Middle Ages, and then in the early modern period where the Kingdom of Denmark encompassed Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, the Faroes, of course. Yeah. Many people would argue, certainly myself, that some people in Britain have found it difficult to lose an empire, in the famous words, and find a role. How did Denmark find a role as a country within the European context with all of that history?
But that was actually a painful process, being reduced to such a small country, and it took actually far more than 100 years for us to realize. Once realizing that, I think we have been focused on doing what we can with the little influence that we have, and try to have a very active foreign policy.
There was a famous New Zealand politician, I think, who won an election on the slogan, "We're a small country, but we think big." Yeah. Would that be a slogan for Denmark?
I'll use that. That's a good. That's actually very good. Yeah.
Well, I'm writing your election literature for next year. I can't guarantee you success in the elections, Nick, but what I can guarantee you is the receipt of an Alex Salmond quaich for being on the show. Now, you know the drill. This is Gaelic for a loving cup, the quaich. Whiskey, only Scotch, in the quaich and round all your many friends.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex.
So let's go another one.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us after the break when Alex tests the views of Magni Argi, a representative in the Danish Parliament, but someone arguing for full autonomy for his own island group of the Faroes. We'll see you then.
Welcome back to the Danish Parliament here in Christiansborg in Copenhagen. I'm now going to speak to a representative from a community who wants independence not just from the European Union but from Denmark itself. I'm going to speak to Magne Arge from the Faroe Islands. Magne Arge, how would you assess the developments in Danish politics with the election upcoming, and how might that benefit the Faroe Islands, which you represent here in Copenhagen?
I think it's moving forward like a close race between the existing government and the blue wing in the parliament, as we call it, and the opposition and the red wing. If it develops in the way as it looks, it could happen that it will be a hung parliament. And in that case, the Faroese members and even the Greenlandic members may come into a very central position in appointing the new Statsminister or the presidency here.
Now, Magne, I know your family has a long history in this Danish parliament because your great-grandfather built the staircase. But you're a business person coming into politics, and given that, I'm pretty sure you've got your list of objectives already drawn up, just in case you're left in a position of holding the balance of power.
Yeah, I've already done that in the parliament, and a list of the very focal points I do have is partly that the right to self-determination, the external self-determination, should be announced to the United Nations and to the external community, international community. That's one thing. It's only an internal acceptance as it is now.
So the Faroe Islands are an autonomous community, not in the European Union like Denmark is, but nonetheless in many things the sovereignty still lies in this Danish parliament.
That is correct, and well, Denmark has delivered part of its sovereignty into the Brussels. We still hold the right to organize our own fishery policy. We still have to negotiate our own trade deals, for instance. But Denmark holds the sovereignty on this area as well, and that causes sometimes a conflict of interest. And last time we saw it as a huge conflict was when the EU set up an embargo towards the Faroe Islands, and Denmark was sitting on both sides of the table. That is an impossible construction in the long run, and we need to solve that so the Faroe Islands gets the sovereignty on these very focal areas for the Faroese society.
Well, for some years, the Faroe Islands have been playing international football, and with some success. I remember a victory against Austria, and Scotland have only sneaked past you once or twice. But in terms of Faroes becoming an independent country, would then it be your objective in trading terms to join the European Free Trade Association?
Let me first say that we played Scotland twice with a draw.
I was wiping that out from history.
But I would say that becoming independent gives us the opportunity to form alliances with other international communities, may it be EFTA, may it be other countries or whoever, not necessarily becoming a part of the EU, because that needs an agreement with EU on sovereignty with regards to fishery policy, because we are making our welfare and our income from fishing and control of the waters around Faroes and from aquaculture. So for us, the membership of EU is a difficult one, but being a part of the international society gives us the possibility to take part in all sorts of fora, multilateral, international, or whatever, which we don't hold today because Denmark is actually holding that position and the seat in all the international fora.
Of course, EFTA membership like Iceland or Norway or Switzerland or Liechtenstein would allow you control of your own resources, but still have access to the single marketplace of the European Economic Area, the 600 million people in that huge construct.
Definitely, and that is something that we've been discussing for years, but it's difficult to put these negotiations advance as long as we are part of the Danish sovereignty, you could say, because EFTA finds it difficult to make a negotiation with somebody who's on both sides on the table, both within the EU or with the EFTA. It doesn't work. But at this time, when we would be independent, we would be in a different position. And we wouldn't be the smallest member of EFTA anyway, because Liechtenstein is actually fewer citizens than we are.
One of the smallest countries in the world, of course, by some measurements, the most prosperous country in the world, Liechtenstein. But the calculation for the Faroes would be largely based on your resources, which you would want to have control over. Denmark would have a different calculation. I mean, what's your assessment? I mean, Denmark famously has been Eurosceptical within the European Union. I mean, voted against the Maastricht Treaty, for example, not part of the euro. But do you think there's any serious prospect of Denmark as a whole deciding to leave the European Union?
I don't think so. It is my understanding from the years I've been in politics here and spent time here in Copenhagen that largely the Danes are accepting being a part of the European Union. I am myself in favor of a European cooperation and having in a large scale a good relation between European countries. I think that is needed in this world, not least with Trump and whatever. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that I am in favor of being a part of the European Union as it is constructed today. But the Danes, I think, are going to stay there. So for that reason, we are going in each our direction. And the more time passes by, the more conflicts may arise, the more the need for us to depart in each our track and get in control of our affairs.
And obviously the Faroe Islands in geographical terms are much closer to Scotland than you are to Denmark. Do you see cooperation with Scotland in the future as being one of the additional aspects that the Faroe Islands will be able to do with greater control over international relations?
Definitely, and Scotland is our nearest neighbour, so it's very natural for us to build a relation to Scotland and to the UK, which is a huge market as well. So you could say that even a Brexit is not necessarily something that is scaring us in the Faroes, because it may open up some new opportunities for us, while for Denmark it is more scary because it's a huge market for Denmark.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, you're a representative in the Danish Parliament, but just about every other member of this Parliament will be looking a bit leery at Brexit and saying what are the implications for Danish-UK trade, whereas the Faroe Islands, you may perhaps see some opportunities from the Brexit process in the UK.
Definitely. It will both be with regard to agreement around fishery, it could be with agreement around free trade agreements, but it's also, I think, a possibility of building a stronger relation between nations around the North Atlantic, and it's moving a bit of the geopolitical weight, a bit more northbound, you could say, which includes us. And even though we are few people, we control what you could say is 280,000 square kilometers of sea area, which is quite huge, and with all the resources included. So for that reason, it makes sense for us. And it also makes sense for us in an Arctic context, if you are looking even further north.
Well, let's look at that. As you say, the Faroe Islands are a small community, but you have a big sea, and you have a big stake in the Arctic Circle. And many people are now arguing, particularly with the effect of climate change and opening up of sea routes, that the Arctic is becoming one of the key resource areas of the world. Is that part of the analysis that the Faroe Islands share?
Absolutely. And I think that the difference of approach to this between Denmark, for instance, and Faroe Islands and partly Greenland. Greenland is a different creature here because they are very much the Arctic of the North, you could say. And that is that Denmark has a geopolitical view upon these matters because their control over Greenland and Faroes is making them punching much higher in the world than they otherwise would. For us, this is more about the welfare of the people living in this area and how we are protecting the interest of the people there. So for that reason, we have a different starting point when we are discussing the Arctic future. There are huge opportunities with the melting ice and the opening up of the landmass and the sea routes and things like that. But the cause for it is very much due to pollution, to the CO2 footprint, which are contained in the sea, and this may cause huge damage to our area as well if it's going to be more heat in the sea, for instance, because it changes the patterns of the fishing stocks, the plastic in the sea, coming from the urban societies all over the world. We need to protect our area and to create some sort of an understanding for this in other areas of the world so that we can lower this pollution and secure the basis for our welfare and for our ability to harvest from the sea and the land in the Arctic area.
Magni Argi, your grandfather, great-grandfather, built the the fabric of this Danish Parliament. The magnificent staircases in this place were built in the Faroe Islands by your great-grandfather. Therefore, that's a strong tie to the Kingdom of Denmark. Is there nothing within you that says, well, some tie with the Danish kingdom or the Danish people, with Copenhagen, with this Parliament, ain't a bad thing for the Faroe Islands?
Well, in my maiden speech, which I made here in the Danish Parliament, I explained to them about the stairs, and this is actually the highest thing that you can reach in the Danish society, is walking up these stairs to the Danish Parliament. And that is the highest thing you can experience in democracy in Denmark. What I think that the Danes now owe to the Faroese as well is coming up with the last steps we need to create our own independent democratic state of the Faroe Islands. So I hope that we can reach an agreement on that before we are going for an independence referendum somewhere in the near future.
Like the argue, I can't match the craftsmanship of this magnificent staircase, but I can present you with the Alex Salmond Quaich, Scots Gaelic for a loving cup. And I don't think there's any need to tell somebody from the Faroe Islands the drill. Whiskey in the quaich, and then round your many friends.
May I tell you
Thank you, sir.
that we are actually starting to brew whiskey in the Faroe Islands, so we will taste it in a few years when it's ready.
But only Scotch in that quaich.
Okay.
Denmark joined the European community as it was then in 1973 on the very same day as Britain joined. Over the years, it shared many of the Eurosceptic attitudes that are commonplace in Britain. It voted against Maastricht in the 1990s. It's never joined the euro but kept the krona. Brexiteers said this would be one of the countries which would follow Britain out of the exit door. And yet when you ask Danish parliamentarians across the political spectrum, there's concern, worry about Brexit, even some humour. But there is no serious body of opinion who believe that Denmark is going to be next in line to exit the European Union. The Burns poem, To a Louse, that I quoted at the beginning of this show, I would some poor the gift to gie us, to see ourselves as others see us, it wad frae many a blunder free us, or foolish notion. It's perhaps to be regretted that so few of Britain's Brexiteers are devotees of the poetry of Scotland's national bard. And so from Tasmina and myself and all at the show, from here at the Danish Parliament in Christiansburg, it's goodbye for now.